In 2006, a change would happen in the world of endurance sports car racing that would define its path for decades, a path which the discipline still walks today. And no, I'm not talking about diesel engines in winning Le Mans prototypes, although that did also happen that year. What I am talking about is a regulation set that was implemented for the first time in 2006, a new GT car class called GT3. We've said it many times before, but in sim racing, GT3 cars are everywhere, and more recently, hypercars have been popping up left, right and centre as well, meaning that a majority of modern racing sim titles allow you to actually simulate a modern endurance sports car race. That is, of course, a great thing, but many younger sim racers might not even be aware of how endurance racing looked before GT3s, pre-2006, how it looked when it was decided that, for one reason or another, things needed to change. And thanks to Automobilista 2's latest update and DLC pack specifically, we can now experience how the world of endurance racing looked, sounded, and felt in 2005. Sports car racing in general was going through a major crisis in the early noughties. Following a mass exodus of top manufacturers from the sport after the flash-in-the-pan GT1 versus LMP golden age of the late 90s. I say golden age, more like a golden minute in all honesty, it was very, very brief. The sport was indisputably in decline. A fragmented and diminishing fan base, rising costs, a perceived drop in prestige, and lack of competition in the top class. Something that wasn't helped by the car I'm driving right now, the Audi R8. This car absolutely obliterated the competition in the top prototype class for years. In fact, the only car that actually managed to beat it at Le Mans was a Bentley, and even that was an Audi R8 underneath. A slightly different version of the Audi R8. That's a story we've told already in our full history of Le Mans video, which you should definitely check out at some point. But that's kind of the point. This story, the Audi R8, has kind of been told many times before. This car has also appeared in many racing games before, so it's not really new to a lot of us. So instead, I thought I would focus on a different car. A car that, in a roundabout way, sort of spawned the only true Audi challenger. Courage Competition was a small French independent outfit that had been building Le Mans prototypes since the early 80s. This team was the racing equivalent of a journeyman outfit, never quite obtaining the resources to take it to the big guns, but quietly going about its business, picking up the odd good result, and partnering up with global powerhouses like Porsche and Nissan along the way. The 1999 Nissan R391, for instance, was actually a Courage. But for 2000, with Nissan departing along with so many others, it launched its brand new C60, powered by a V10 Judd engine. Initially, these cars would be run by customer programs, so you had SMG running Courage C60s, and you also had Pescarolo running them as well. And then a couple of years later, Courage themselves would get in on the act with a factory effort. Now, these cars weren't exactly front runners, they sort of made up the numbers, but they weren't bad. They were relatively competitive, most of the time in the hands of Pescarolo, it has to be said, who went a slightly different route with their car. They put a twin-turbo V6 Peugeot engine in it, and those ones tended to be the most competitive of the lot. By 2004, however, Pescarolo were the only team running Courage C60s, and they sort of went their own direction with development. They were pretty fast, but again, they just weren't a match for those annoying Audi R8s. That would all change in 2005, however. There was a change up to the regulations in 2005, which meant that the older LMP900 cars were sort of beginning to be phased out, and they were also given speed penalties, performance penalties, which slowed them down a little bit, so that the cars built to the newer regulations could be competitive. Now, Courage updated the C60 with the C60 Hybrid, which is exactly the spec of car I'm driving right now. It still had the 4-litre Judd V10 that started off in the car. Pescarolo, however, with what was now called the Pescarolo C60, based on, of course, the original Courage but just developed slightly, went down the route of a 5-litre Judd V10, which had even more performance. And this year, for the first time in a very long time, Audi hadn't brought the fastest car to Le Mans. It was Pescarolo. Now, an all-French team with 2 all-French driver lineups, running a French car, the Courage originally, on French soil at Le Mans. It was a match made in heaven. A perfect Le Mans story could have unfolded. But sadly it wasn't to be, even though the Pescarolos were faster than the Audis with their speed restrictions, and by the way, the 2005 version of the Audi in this game is the one that is restricted, so it's not like the Audi R8 is going to run away at the front of this class in AMS2. The Audi was still the most reliable, and they still had the best consistency. The Sebastian Loeb Pescarolo car crashed out through the night, the other one had gearbox trouble, and overheating problems at the end, and they still only finished 2 laps off the win, so despite the issues, Pescarolo came very, very close to actually beating the Audis, but alas, it didn't happen. Le Mans gods sometimes just don't want you to win. The Pescarolos would still find a lot of success elsewhere, however. They would win the Le Mans Endurance Series twice in a row in 2005 and 2006. Now obviously this Courage I'm driving right now has the kind of Pescarolo livery, but this is the Courage run version. So this is the C60 with the 4-litre Judd engine. And they just didn't have the resources really to take it all the way to the top. As we said before, it never really changed for Courage. Eventually the company would be bought by Orica in 2007, but this car marked, I would say, one of the high points in this company's tenure at Le Mans. You may have noticed that I'm driving an older version of the Le Mans circuit. It's got a different first chicane, it's also got a different run through Tertre Rouge, it's slower, it's slightly narrower and tighter. This is of course the 2005 layout of the circuit. And this is going to be available in another DLC pack for 2005 versions of circuits. You've got 2005 Road Atlanta, and you've also got 2005 Spa. The three of these will be packed together in a sort of historical track pack, and it's only going to cost $10, or whatever that converts to in your local currency. So it's a pretty good deal, and it's just cool to see old versions of circuits. AMS2 has always been great for this, but even in 2005, which doesn't feel that long ago, you still had such a difference in the runoff areas. You had more gravel, more grass, different profiles to the corners, and I find that fascinating as a big motorsport fan. Of course, the Pescarolos themselves have sort of been immortalised in the racing game world, becoming famous through Gran Turismo, and as a kid I just thought it was very cool. I loved the green and blue liveries, but the Courage C60 is just not a car you hear about very often, so I'm all for the C60 being in the game in Courage form rather than Pescarolo. I love the way you have to drive these cars on the AMS2. You've got to kind of respect the fact that they've got a lot of power and a lot of torque, and yes, they've got aero, but not a ridiculous amount. They don't have the downforce levels of those LMP1 rocket ships of the 2010s. They sound better, they feel more raw to me. I obviously love a Judd V10 in the back. And I just find them a very, very well-balanced driving experience. I should note that this AMS2 DLC also includes the Dallara SP1, another LMP chassis similar to that of the Courage, which would be competitive in various hands, and especially when partnered with the might of Chrysler and Orica, but it never quite took it to the Audis. Another example of a similar story is with Lola. Lola also built and developed its own Le Mans prototypes, whilst working with big manufacturers all over the world, and also selling to customer teams too. Its BO540 was launched in 2005, and this car would win numerous races and titles in the LMP2 category, across the likes of the American Le Mans Series, the Le Mans Endurance Series, and winning the class at Le Mans itself, all in that first year. Competition in LMP2 wasn't exactly strong at the time, but Lola did the business, and were one of only a few that took up the mantle of building a fast, reliable, and importantly, affordable customer effort. So this car represents the best effort from the worst class at the time. Still, an important part of history. As it still is today, the Le Mans 24-hour was the pinnacle of sports car racing, but unlike today, there was no World Endurance Championship. We had the American Le Mans Series, or ALMS, the Le Mans Endurance Series after ELMS had failed, and then GT Championships, like the FIA GT Championship, which would ultimately, through a convoluted series of events, become what we know now as GT World Challenge Europe. Yes, the GT3 series represented officially in Assetto Corsa Competizione. As you've probably picked up by now, prototype racing really wasn't in a great state at this time, but GT racing was in a much stronger position. At that time, there were two main categories of GT racing, GTS and GT, which would in 2005 become recognised as GT1 and GT2 respectively. Now, to make things more confusing, this GT1 isn't the same as the GT1 we know as the pinnacle of sports car racing in the late 90s. That class of GT1 racing would essentially become defunct in 1999. GTS was known at the time as LMGT2 at Le Mans specifically, and this would eventually become the new GT1. Meanwhile, the slower GT class, known simply as GT or LMGT at Le Mans, would later become GT2. And to confuse matters even further, in the FIA GT Championship, GTS was known as GT, and GT was known as NGT. You still with me? Didn't think so. Terrible naming conventions aside, GT1 cars of this era were quite simply monstrous. Initially, it was the Chrysler Vipers with their 8-litre V10s which would prove the car to beat. Then, you had the bellowing V8 Corvette C5Rs that would deliver a metaphorical uppercut every time they drove by. Bright yellow, super reliable, super consistent, very noisy, and very successful. From Europe, there was the wailing V12 Ferrari 550s built by ProDrive, and the subsequent Aston Martin DBR9s, also built by ProDrive. But outside this pack of long-established contenders, there was an oddball. a GT1 car which was never allowed to race at Le Mans specifically, but did carve out its own legendary status elsewhere. This is the Maserati MC12, a homologation special of its time. Now, back in the early noughties, Maserati was actually owned by Ferrari. Ferrari had just developed the 575 GT1 car for customers, but rather embarrassingly, it wasn't as quick as the older 550 Ferrari, which was actually developed by ProDrive in Banbury. So Ferrari really saw the Maserati MC12 as an opportunity to do something better, do something a bit different. So it went about it in a different way. It took the chassis and the engine from the existing Ferrari Enzo, put a new body on it, sold some road car versions, and voila, you had the Maserati MC12 GT1 homologation special. There was, however, a problem, because even though the GT1 class regulations at the time were relatively uniform, there were still differences between different organising bodies. So the FIA, for example, had a different rule set slightly to the ACO, who organised the Le Mans 24-hour, and the American Le Mans Series also had its own set of regulations. And that meant that the Maserati, with its slightly odd dimensions, wasn't actually eligible to take part in the Le Mans 24-hour. It also wasn't eligible for the American Le Mans Series, although it would be able to compete as a sort of invitational entry, not scoring points, with a slightly shortened front nose. I'm so sorry, I've just pushed the Chrysler Viper off. It's not necessarily a massive surprise this is the case. I mean, you look at the cars the Maserati was competing against at the time, the Chryslers, the Corvettes, the Astons, they all look a little bit more regular for a GT car, whereas the Maserati has got that kind of Toyota GT1 thing going on where it looks almost like it was designed to be a prototype. But despite not being ever allowed to compete at Le Mans or really compete properly in the ALMS until a few years later, this car did and was allowed to compete in the FIA GT Championship. And it was incredible. Making its debut in the second half of 2004 up against customer Vipers and Corvettes and all the cars we've mentioned before, Murcielagos, Salines, the lot, the Maserati proved to be the best of the bunch. Its first full season was in 2005, it would win the Teams Championship. It would then go on to win 8 Teams Championships across 8 seasons in that championship. Complete and utter domination of the series, and this car was run all the way up until the demise of the rule set around about 2010. It's such a weird car because it looks amazing, it sounds incredible, it drives great, sequential box, and it's possibly the best GT1 car ever made, but in a weird way, it could never really hold that status properly because it wasn't legal to race at Le Mans, which is kind of where I guess you set out your stall and make your history with this sort of racing. It's a really strange one to sort of define. Oh no, I've locked up. This gravel trap was there at Spa in 2005. It's not quite as bad anymore. This is the thing when you drive these older versions of these circuits. You've got so much more gravel to look out for. Often the Armco's a lot closer as well. Yeah, the Maserati's an interesting one for me because as a kid I actually really didn't like it. I thought it was an ugly car, and I also didn't really like any car that dominated a championship. I just got bored of it. It's a thing where you always tend to root for the underdog, or I do at least. But I have to say, as I've gotten older and I've actually appreciated this, I guess, era of sports car racing more and kind of gone back into it, I actually sort of feel sad that the Maserati never got to prove itself at Le Mans. And I actually have fallen in love with this car over the years. I think it's very, very cool. I actually think it looks amazing. That is not how you take Blanchimont. The racing version just looks a bit shorter and stubbier than the road car, and it was the road car I thought was very ugly, whereas this race car, yeah, it looks incredible. The rear end especially, which we can now get a great look at. Always helped by the sound, of course. I mean, the Ferrari 550 or 575 and the Aston Martin DBR9 that you can see up ahead, I mean, that's 3 incredible V12 racing cars. And those 3 cars are definitely up there as, you know, if I was given the option to drive any real-world racing car on a real-world circuit, it's going to be one of those 3 probably that comes to mind first. And then, to complete the set of 4 long-running classes, we of course have what was known in 2005 as GT2. This was mostly dominated through the years by Porsche with its 996, occasionally pipped by the likes of Ferrari with the 360, and Panos with its Esperante. The Porsche, however, remained the golden child, and is also included in this pack. Much like Maserati with its MC12, however, there was another car in the class that would never compete at Le Mans, but still achieve incredible success, arguably becoming the most iconic of the lot along the way. 1 season. That was the extent of BMW's factory foray into the American Le Mans series. It happened in 2001. There were already BMWs in the series, E46 M3s like the one I'm driving right now, but they had straight 6 engines. This particular E46 M3 GTR, which Schnitzer Motorsport ran in the ALMS, bringing the car out around halfway through 2001, had a V8 engine. The V8 upgrade made the car a totally different animal, and BMW came, they conquered, and amidst a bit of homologation controversy and some exploitations of loopholes that other manufacturers weren't too impressed by, they immediately left. One season, win the championship, leave. Seems like not everyone liked the V8 BMW M3. This car would never go on to race at Le Mans for the 24-hour. It would, however, be brought out a handful of times, notably for the Nürburgring 24-hour races from 2003 until 2005. And much like the success it had achieved in a short period of time stateside, this car would be mega successful at the Nürburgring. In fact, BMW M3 GTRs finished first and second in 2004 and 2005, the first time any car had ever won back-to-back Nürburgring 24-hour races. So it didn't do much, but it made it count. Now technically this car isn't in the GT2 class as part of this DLC pack. It's kind of in its own GTR class, 2004 version of the car. This is the livery from the Nürburgring 24-hour races. I'm guessing that's just because the BMW never actually really competed in GT2 at any point. The only time really was that brief stint in the ALMS when the GT classes were split in a slightly different way. So it's technically different in performance to the likes of the Porsche 996, but I think you can lump them all in together and still create a pretty awesome 2005 endurance sports car field. I've always thought this BMW epitomizes what a kind of middle-of-the-road GT car should be. And I don't mean that as in middle of the road in terms of how much I like it or how good it is. I just more mean it's not too powerful. It's got enough power, but it's not crazy. It's got downforce, but not crazy amounts of downforce. It's front engine, rear-wheel drive, so it's got a kind of standard layout. It's relatively easy to drive, but you still have to manage it. Obviously, the straight-cut gearbox makes an incredible sound, as does the V8 engine. It's not like any other V8 engine I'm aware of. And the car is somewhat of a gaming icon. I mean, whether it's Need for Speed Most Wanted or Gran Turismo or Total Immersion Racing, whatever it is, this car is prevalent in a lot of cool racing games. I should also mention the Milano GT36, which is also in the GT2 class with the Porsche that I'm going to pass right now. And that is actually not part of the DLC, it's free, so it's going to be added to the game. It's basically a non-copyrighted or license-free version of a Ferrari 360 by the looks of it. So yeah, that's coming there for free. A good way to taste what the endurance racing's like without actually buying the full pack. And then of course Road Atlanta makes up the third of our circuits, which is also another pack at $9.99 to get those 3 circuits that we've driven on today in 2005 spec. Of course, it has to be said that GT3 regulations did come about for good reasons, to lower costs, level the playing field, unify regulations, and encourage amateur drivers to race with the pros. Basically, the cars had to be relatively friendly to drive. For this to be the case in the first place, it did mean that the previous set of regulations and the cars within it had to be the opposite of that. Too expensive, unevenly matched, with a lack of unified regulations, and difficult to drive. But that's exactly the point. It was amazing for viewers and fans, amazing for sim racers nowadays, but not so amazing for the health and well-being of the sport and the long-term survival of the discipline. Stefan Rattel and the SRO who came up with the regulations were of course proven absolutely right. GT racing has flourished since GT3s came along. Whatever you think of BOP and the racing itself, tons of manufacturers are involved, the regulations are largely uniform, GT3 cars are used in series all over the world, from WEC and national championships all the way through to the DTM. But more and more modern racing titles are leaning towards older cars for nostalgic purposes, because sim racing criteria is very different to the real thing. We don't care about car development costs, it doesn't affect us. We don't care about real world parity or how popular a series is proving to be. We just want to be able to experience epic machinery from behind the wheel, and that is why we at Traxion love to see things like this. Of course, along with this AMS2 DLC release comes an update, and there are plenty of other changes that we haven't touched on here, such as the UI and anti-aliasing improvements, not to mention the recent changes to multiplayer, AI performance and force feedback. So to find out more about all of this, be sure to visit the TraxionGG website. Do let us know in the comments below which of these cars you're most looking forward to driving. Leave us a like if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe for more, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.